Hey, welcome to today's podcast. I'm Josh, and I got my colleague here, Al. Hey, Al. Say hi, Al.
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
All right. It is crazy in the security industry. Let's talk the hardest question here and on the table on what went wrong last week.
Yeah, what a
But
week.
yeah, what a week and what a week. First a tsunami, then an earthquake, and then and then at an assassination of a CEO. Uh, but I think we should qualify this and say we're not here to tar and feather anybody for the mistakes and failures of any organization, but rather it's an opportunity to learn some lessons and reflect because in light of last week's unfortunate assassination of United Healthcare CEO, um, undoubtedly there's going to be copycats. So we're not here to, add salt to the wound, but rather we're here to say, hey, let's be mindful. Let's think, what went wrong and how can we learn from those mistakes? Because, as I said, there's going to be copycats.
Yeah,
So,
100%. I mean, anytime you have a high profile event like this, it's easy to point the finger and be like, oh, well, this is this person's fault or that. But, that's not, in my opinion, it's not really productive when it comes to the overall goal of, protecting people and keeping, the environment safe, right? I mean, but we also at the same token we have to be brutally honest about what went wrong, right? Because if we're not brutally honest about where the misses were, we're not really doing ourselves as an industry any justice. So I think, like, to your point, it's less about pointing fingers and saying, "Oh, well, I would have never made that decision if I was in charge," right? It's more about let's kind of walk through where the gaps were here, what got missed, what could have been done better, without obviously without pointing fingers, but primarily highlighting a process failure is what I see here. Um, with kind of the goal of anyone listening, take this back to your teams and do a process review, do a security program review, and make sure the same gaps aren't you know uh, apparent in your program, right?
a lot of self reflection.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a
And
lot of people doing some, man, we better make sure we go back and make sure this isn't an issue for us, right? So
yeah, and if not just even for the organizations, but let's just face it, the industry as a whole will need to reflect because something broke. Like I said, not to point fingers at anyone or any group or any industry. It is an opportunity to learn because I think we can, take a quote from the recruit. Um, uh, our failures known, our successes are not.
yeah, and that's a great way to sum up security in general, right? When everything goes right, nobody cares. When everything goes wrong, it's severe impacts, right? To in the media, stock price, and we'll talk about all this here soon. But I mean, when it goes bad for security, it goes really really bad.
Yeah. So let's start it off. Al, why don't you share a little about yourself, and then I can fill in like who am I a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Al Bora. I've been in the security industry for probably going on about 10 years now, corporate security. Prior to being in corporate security, I was in the Marines for served 21 years in the Marine Corps, various roles, infantry, intelligence, and several command level positions as well, in the Marine Corps. And then after I got out, I transitioned into a reserve capacity and then into corporate security. And currently, I'm the VP of data centers for Metro One Loss Prevention Group.
And I'm Josh. I come from uh, Al's other counterpart in the cybersecurity space, where I'm helping to break things and helping to defend things. And I'm currently a founder and managing partner of NetForce. Been around for many years in the industry, doing a lot of different things, but spent a lot of it actually most recently in the security space, helping businesses to manage their risk. And then on my off time, I get to teach as well some young bright minds what's coming up in this space and industry. So it's a lot of fun. So let's set the scenario out here today, Al. What were we talking about? We prefaced it a little bit, but let's definitely set the scene here, and let's do classic. What led up to the series of unfortunate events?
Yeah, yeah. So we'll start off obviously with the UHC assassination of Brian Thompson, who I don't think any of us knew who what his name was until last week. Many of us, which is kind of concerning too, on a lot of different degrees. But no secret, he was for all intents and purposes assassinated on his way to a board meeting, Midtown Manhattan, just before 7 a.m., broad daylight, in the street. If you, we're not going to show the video clip, but for obvious reasons. But I think the video clip is 21 seconds from start to finish of excuse me, the assailant entering, executing the assassination, and then leaving the scene. So 21 seconds start to finish, from what we saw from the video. And unfortunately, Mr. Thompson lost his life in the event. Um, it also comes at a time when, the company you work for, excuse me again, United Healthcare, was having a board meeting and a earnings call. And so clearly not the best time for your CEO to be assassinated. Um, Very bad for, optics on a lot of different levels. But I think what's important, really, I mean, a lot of people have been focusing on who did it, and rightly so, or how this could have happened. I think we definitely want to focus more on the how instead of the who. Um, and there, as of today, there is a suspect in custody. Luigi Mangione is his name, if I recall correctly. And I think over the next several days, we'll learn more and more and more about motives and intent, and what drove him to do this. If he is in fact the actual shooter. Um, but I think we got to start a few days before this event. And honestly, we could probably start about 2 or 3 years before this event to really kind of understand, how do we get to, what happened on that morning. I think, for anyone who doesn't know, United Healthcare is the largest health insurance company provider here in the United States. I believe 55 million customers. They, for the most part, have had a very notorious reputation of denying claims, if you believe the internet. So they're not much liked by many of their customers. They have a very poor customer satisfaction rating. And that is what it is. It's part of the industry they're in. Healthcare is not necessarily an easy business to be in. And there's lots of factors for the negative attitude towards them. But I think when you consider we're about 4 years waning down from COVID, during the COVID years, there was a lot of unrest and tension, a lot of turbulence when it came to healthcare. Um, a lot of the insurance companies were denying claims. So there's already a major health event that happens in 2020 that we're all aware of, COVID, um, and people losing jobs, depressed economy, um, inflation obviously coming in a couple years later. So there's a lot of financial tension within the community right now across the nation, on top of health issues as well, right? So the overall backdrop is this is not a well liked industry overall, for several different factors, right? Um, going back, I think 3 years, if you go on the internet, you'll see a lot of negative comments and posts against United Healthcare as a company. Um, Now, the information we got after the shooting is there were direct threats made to Mr. Thompson's life. So his wife came out and said that people were threatening him personally, right? For whatever reason, again, we don't know why, and there's several factors that go into this. We don't know why. Um, he either chose voluntarily not to have an executive protection team, or UHC decided that those threats did not warrant extra security. As for whatever reason, they felt that him walking down the main street without an executive protection team, without a secure driver, was fine. Their risk profile dictated that this is not going to be an issue. And unfortunately, the shooter had different plans, and we have the situation that we have now, right? Because of that. So, I think it's as more and more information comes out, we start seeing like these puzzle pieces coming together. This is not a well liked individual. For whatever for various reasons. He's a CEO of a big insurance company that's has the highest denial rate of any other company out there, right? So there's lots of reasons why people don't like him. There's lots of reasons why people don't like his company. There's lots of reasons why his risk profile would be considered elevated, if you just look at things objectively, right? Um, and so I think when we consider corporate security, when we consider the physical side, we consider the cyber side, and over the last probably 10 or 15 years, we haven't seen the convergence of those two disciplines to the way we probably need to. And I think this event highlights that is there's clearly a lot of stuff happening on the web, which is giving us indicators that there's an elevated risk profile for this individual. For whatever reason, and we don't know if the cyber team and the physical security team had the conversation or not, but the outcome that we got indicates we can speculate that the conversations weren't being had to the degree that they needed to be having, right? And so when you have these threats, these online threats, when you have indications and warnings that say, an individual in your organization is being targeted, there has to be a conversation between the physical and the cyber side as to how credible is this threat. What's the mitigation plan? Do we have other options? Does Mr. Thompson actually need to be on site in New York if 48 hours before the event he's getting death threats on his life, right? So these are some of the conversations that I don't want to speculate, but it sounds like these conversations weren't being had, right? And this is how we get to this outcome. Unfortunately, it's really a lack of communication in different offices within the corporate security structure. And so it's an unfortunate event, but I think there are a lot of lessons here that we can take away from this. Is at a minimum, I think cyber and physical need to be having a weekly sync to talk about what did you see, what did I see, what can we do about it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and I don't think even a weekly sync. A week is like an eternity in
well, if we look at last
terms.
week, if we look at last week,
Yeah,
they should have been talking every day,
yeah,
right?
exactly. It's like
Like
a week is like too long in this world. It's like a week is like almost like a year in slow traditional times.
right, right. So I mean, I hope from this event we at least start breaking down that wall to where we're integrating our cyber and physical functions much better, right? Because typical Fortune 500 company, you're going to have a GSOC, which is a Global Security Operations Center. You're going to have some type of risk management team, which is looking at risk threats to the company, the personalities, the workforce, right? And then you're going to have your EP guys, event security guys, right, that are actually doing the protection of the actual executives, right? The decision makers, of the company. Um, and in a perfect world, we hope that all three of those guys are in lockstep and they're talking all the time, and the left hand is feeding the right hand, and vice versa. Um, just from the surface here, what it looks like is there was a gap there. Something fell through the cracks, and we don't know. What we don't know is we don't know if it was process. We don't know if it was just a miscommunication. We don't know if it was, you know, the algorithm was off on the risk management. They said no. You know what? No, it's low threat.
So let's just blow this up for a second. Pardon the poor choice of words right there. But let's just scratch out UHC's name. Let's just say it's company ABC. Company ABC's lost an executive. Let's theorize here where typical, let's say, top three or top four failures would be. Where would we start looking? Obviously, I agree with you that in a typical enterprise environment, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
Right.
That being physical and then cyber. They don't talk, they don't cross pollinate, they don't work together. If anything, they look at each other as adversaries fighting for the same dollars,
Right.
and the same amount of and time, by the way, in the enterprise space. And I think that does a massive disservice to who we're serving in the enterprise, and it's to the business. I mean, I think you pointed out to me in an article, since the assassination, what, $21 billion evaporated from UHC's market cap.
Yeah.
I mean,
55.
55.
55.
Ooh, even worse. Uh, but think about that. 55 billions of dollars just went up in smoke overnight just because their CEO just got assassinated. That's insane. I mean, talk about penny wise, dollar foolish. I
Right.
mean, that is years of people's salary, even if you're paying at $250,000 and a whole team of people monitoring 24/7, 366. That is years of salary just gone off the bat. And not talking about tools or anything else. We're just talking about manpower, which is typically EP is. So clearly in this case, dollar wise, sorry, penny wise, dollar foolish on this.
Absolutely. I mean the statistics are staggering, and we've got articles that we'll link into the post here so everyone can read it. But I mean, we look at the Fortune 500, and according to the articles, only like 20% of the Fortune 500 actually have, full on in house executive protection teams that are full time protecting their executives, right? When we consider the biggest cyber attacks that have happened, over the course of the last 10 years, we're, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in cyber threats, which, look, that's no small number. But in the course of almost 48 hours, $55 billion lost just in one company's stock price, right? The shareholders lost 55 billion. The the healthcare sector, every one of the other insurance companies that operate in that sector took a loss last week. Some of the biggest losses we've seen in that sector in a 5-day period. So when you consider that the impact of this is significantly bigger than some of the biggest cyber attacks that we've seen. And this is not to downplay cyber at all. I think that we have to protect against that. But we're talking about the amount of money lost over the last week in this sector pales in comparison to what the cost of an protection team is, right? Um, and I'll throw some more numbers at you. On the high side, executive protection, Mark Zuckerberg, $24 million is what he's spending on executive protection. And I mean, that's a big number, right? Um, but Microsoft, one of the other Magnificent Seven companies, 58,000 last year to protect their CEOs. So I don't know what the right answer is on the cost. Everyone's different, but somewhere between 24 million and 58,000 is still, even if you spend 24 million, that's still significantly less than a $55 billion loss in your shareholder value, right? So I think there has to be some consideration as to what is the impact to the brand, to the industry, by not investing in certain areas of security, right? And I think this highlights the example perfectly of, you know you you cut away from security more and more, but then when the bad thing happens, everybody wants to reinvest, right? But it's too late to reinvest at this point. You've already lost the shareholder value. It's going to take you years probably to get that stock price back up and running. I mean, I think the stock was above 600 um, before Mr. Thompson was shot. It dropped down to like 530, I think, on Thursday night, and then I think Friday it was at back to 540. So you consider that what kind of loss that was to the shareholders simply because they didn't invest. We'll just throw a round number out here: $1 million in executive protection for this individual. I mean, it could have been a temporary detail as well. It could have been a temporary protection detail
just for the day.
just for the day, and I think you would have had, you know, you likely would have prevented, or at the very least disrupted the shooter. And now you're dealing with the fallout, right? You're dealing with loss of shareholder value. They're talking about congressional inquiries into the industry now. They're looking at predatory practices because this in itself has highlighted a whole nother issue, which is bringing even more scrutiny to the industry, right? Uh, so I think we got to look at the big picture impacts here of the lack. I'll bring it back to the lack of communication between cyber and physical. Had a conversation been had, like, hey, we're getting threats to your life on, the cyber side, we really need to talk to EP and figure out what's going on here. Like what is our plan? What is our plan to mitigate this? Because the implications here are massive, right? If something does happen.
Yeah, and I think the whole point here is to remember it's life safety here. You can't
Right.
buy a life. There's just no amount of money in the world that can buy back a life. So obviously there's a risk, a lack of prioritization of life safety. I mean, here in cyber, we always say that, life safety is the most important thing. So obviously, it's been beaten into our minds here. So it makes you wonder, like, okay, why why does cyber have this perspective, and what happened here? And also, by the way, for some fun context, I was just looking up while you're talking. Um, $55 billion is no small number. So it is right around the country size of like Costa Rica and Sudan. So the
Right.
entire economy of a country just evaporated right there, like the size of Costa Rica or Sudan or the Congo or something like that. But that gives you some context here that it's not a small amount of money. It is a lot of money that just poofed went up overnight.
And then you consider like how impactful this event was. Like to your point earlier about copycats, right? It's people would think like, hey, wait, this just happened to a CEO of a major company. All the security teams, we all need to figure this out and beat this up. But ultimately, we see, like, we've seen events like this throughout history. I mean, this is like, I'll take it back to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. I mean, he was literally targeting members of companies that he felt were destroying, the human race through technology, and he was mailing bombs to them, right? So targeting, you know, corporate figures is nothing new. It's something that there is precedent here on this. So I'm just hoping people, in companies and organizations recognize that, we like, this is not something new. This wasn't a new type of targeting method. Um, and with the notoriety that this individual is going to get from this, and it seems, unfortunately, it seems that most people are very apathetic to this, the victim, and I mean, the apathy is, I don't think we've ever seen apathy like this when it came to an individual being murdered in broad daylight in a major U.S. city. It should set off alarm bells to every other Fortune 500 company that, hey, there is a potential that somebody else wants to copycat this and either get the same notoriety or have the same impact, right?
Well, let's talk doomsday scenario here, okay? It, this, in my opinion, this is bad already. In broad daylight, you walk up to the hotel and you get popped off several times, and you don't even see it coming. Like the probably, you know, Brian walked in. Next thing you remember is feeling pain, and the next thing is just poof, gone, life extinguished. But it could have very well been worse because at a meeting of shareholders, that means you have your entire senior leadership in one spot. Like, what could have potentially happened, if this guy was actually a shareholder, potentially? Could he have gone to the shareholder meeting and have actually done a full blown active shooter situation when potentially have taken out the entire executive team?
Well, I mean, I think that would have been a death knell for United Healthcare Group. I don't think they would have ever recovered. But we also got to look at the impacts here of, what that's one industry, right? One industry. Um, let's look at like an AI company, right? Where we have a lot of invested brain power and it's really driving our economy right now, that industry. Assume this individual comes in and there's a team meeting or a corporate meeting, a board meeting, and we lose multiple angel investors, founders of an AI company, and engineers who are working on the product itself. I mean, catastrophic to not only those families and the company, but to the sector when it comes to AI development. Set us back probably 10, 15 years. So this is this is very concerning. And what we don't know what the Hilton hotels where the meeting was being held. We don't know what kind of security they had internally. I'd imagine that they likely had some internal security there, but the question remains, you know, it, we got to look at the if he had gotten into the building and he was able to engage other members of the C-suite and the board, what would that have done to that business? Like that business would have been done, right? So I think there's a lot of conversation that should be had about succession of command. What is our succession plan? In the event something like this happens, but then also, are we planning for this event specifically? Are we thinking in these terms as businesses? Like, if I lose everybody in my C-suite, how does this business survive? When we talk about when they have to say the union address, a member of the cabinet always is off site. There's always one member who's off site, and it's understood that that individual is going to run the country in the event, you know, there's a catastrophic event during the State of the Union address, right? So
Designated survivor.
yeah, so I think you got to look at your shareholder meetings, and you have to look at anytime you're bringing a lot of people together, right? Um, Especially the decision making power or the brain capital of your business, you have to really consider, like, am I elevating the risk profile for myself as a business and these individuals? And I think we have to look at too the in the world we live in. It's very liability based, right? We love liability here in the U.S. Especially when it comes to what went wrong. We like to take people to court and sue them out of it, right? So as a business, you have to look at yourself. Are you liable if you elevate someone's risk profile and you knew there was a threat and you knew there was a problem and you didn't take any corrective action? Are you now liable if something happens to that person, right? So I think that question is going to come out here in this event. Is, threats were made. We know that's a fact. Threats were made to this individual, and yet for whatever reason, we don't know if he just willfully chose to ignore the threats and on his own volition attend the meeting anyway, or if he was advised not to go. But I think that question will be asked: is UHC liable for this death because they knew there was a threat and they did not take any, what appears they did not take any corrective action? Again, speculation, because we don't know what conversations were had behind closed doors, but if that ends up being the case here, what's the legal liability? What's the legal risk to the company? What's the legal risk to the security team? Right? We knew there was a problem. We didn't inform anybody, or we didn't inform the proper teams to take corrective action. Are we all now liable, right, for that wrongful death? So a lot of questions that'll come out from this. So but I think it's things we got to consider, right? Everyone in every company at this point, I think, should be considering this.
So let's talk recommendations here. So we can I think you and I can spend months just dissecting every decision, every speech, everything that happened in the boardroom, everything at the executive level, everything at the EP level, event plan level. We could dissect every one of this, but let's keep it high level at least for this conversation. So obviously we said the teams between cyber and physical definitely need to communicate better. What else do we need to do here? Obviously, I think the big thing is a lesson learned that we should be learning here is we probably really need to rethink our risk strategies here across the board.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about just UHC. I'm talking about every publicly traded Fortune company out there. We really need to think our risk priorities here, um, mainly because I think we've been in this position where we're too reactive and not proactive.
100%.
And, and I think in this case it's clearly as evident by last week's events. A reactive strategy does not work because the worst possible thing that can happen is a loss of human life, and there is nothing you can do at that point. It is just gone. So that's probably the ultimate price to pay for the loss of proper risk management. And I'm thinking just from everything I'm seeing and hearing, like as we started this podcast off, uh, I think they got lucky. The fact that they caught him so quickly. This is only been like what 5 days, 6 days,
5 days,
and
yeah.
they got a person of interest potentially, and I'm making assumption that it is the guy. So 5 6 days, that's pretty fast. But you think about the fact that the guy was hooded and masked up. The guy had a false New Jersey driver's license. The guy disappears into Central Park, a place where 115,000 plus people visits every day, and had a bike waiting for him. The fact that he's willing to part with a backpack and everything like that. That took quite a bit of meticulous planning here. And so if an
and
adversary,
and New York is probably one of the most surveilled cities on the planet. I mean, there's cameras everywhere, especially after 9/11. I mean,
yeah,
it's hard to walk 10 feet there without being in a view of a camera. Um, so yeah, I think it's really interesting how this all played out with his capture. Um, it's one hats off to the law enforcement guys who were working the case. I mean, that I think honestly, after the second or third day, when it was like we don't know who this guy is, we just have pictures. I was getting personally, as a former investigator, I was getting concerned because we have so much facial recognition software out there. People have social media presences. It's hard to not find a picture of someone's face out there on the internet somewhere, right? Or have some clue who this individual is. And we were getting nothing, no leads. And maybe law enforcement was holding that close to the chest. I don't know. And that's a prerogative. They're doing the investigation. But I was getting concerned because we weren't getting a lot of information. But I think that, to your point, it goes to show that this individual appears to have been very driven, done a lot of planning, thought about several different scenarios, and executed what appeared from the 21-second video that we saw, a very 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 well executed elimination operation on his target. And then there was a lot from an operation perspective. That was a very smooth operation that this individual pulled off. And that doesn't, I'm not trying to denigrate the situation or downplay it. I mean, I'm just saying operationally, that was about as smooth as you can be. 21 seconds, your target's gone, and you're out of the picture. And it took, you probably had every internet sleuth on the planet trying to figure out who you are. And how do you get caught if this is the actual individual that this is actually him? Um, a McDonald's employee recognized you, right? Um, so this goes to another point that we always say in physical security: if you see something, say something. In this case, the see something, say something is what got this guy off the street. They put his face out there. A McDonald's employee was like, "I know this guy. I recognize him. He's the guy who shot the dude." This employee then went and called the local police and said, "Hey, I think the dude's in my McDonald's. He just ordered something, right?" So it's an interest. It's just an interesting turn of events, in my opinion. Of clearly this individual meticulous planning, like we said, but then the smallest little detail is what got him jammed up. And so I think it just goes to show that anybody in an organization, doesn't matter if you're the top of the food chain or bottom of the food chain, you can have an impact when it comes to security. You can have an impact on something because you're informed. But to this point, that individual was informed. They knew what to look for. They knew why they were looking for them. I think that's a lesson to take back to any security team out there: is if your people know what to look for, if they know what they need to, what the threats are, and why it's important to report these threats, you have a much better chance of being preventative, going from the reactive to proactive that we talked about, right? And that to me is the big shift that we need to have in this industry. Is we have to figure out a way to go to be proactive, because unfortunately, like you mentioned, when the body's there, the light's been extinguished, it's too late. It's too late. And all too often in our industry, it's an event like this which leads to change. And I think that's got to change.
Yeah, why does it take someone dying to change or impact any of our industries or space? I'm not
I
talking
mean,
just security. I'm just talking in general.
yeah, in general, I mean, it's one of those things where I feel like people don't believe the wolf is there until it's
The door.
at your front door knocking, and then it's like,
Yeah,
oh well, I guess these wolves are real, right?
yeah.
Um,
And Granny's
and
gone, and the wolf is in her clothes.
yeah, I mean, it is sad, but unfortunately, it's just kind of the nature of many industries, not just ours. I think to to this point though, it's really, when it comes to budget. I mean, it's like this isn't the government, this isn't the military. We understand that the primary function of most businesses is to make money, to service your customers, and the investment typically goes into product development or customer service, sales, and marketing. And we understand that, right? It's understood that security, it's a necessary expense that you have to have, but it's not the primary focus. And I think the longer you go between these type of events, right, the less and less spending that security dollar seems to make sense. And so I think it's one of those situations that as security professionals we have to constantly be advising our counterparts in the companies of like, hey, look, I understand there hasn't been any threats or any type of situations over the last 2 or 3 years, but that's because we're doing a good job of being proactive and stopping the threats before they happen, right? And that's always the challenge: is once you do get to that proactive state, well, you're stopping a lot of the issues before they even become issues, right? Uh, so people forget, right? Like, oh well, it's been safe, everything's good. I'm not under threat. Well, no, you're good because we have a very good security team that proactively stops these issues before they become, an assassination in Midtown Manhattan at 7 a.m. Right? So,
Right.
um, I hope the industry continues to reinforce that, where we have to highlight these events and show like, look, this is this is the investment in the security dollar. This is why you invest in security, because the $55 billion share price or shareholder loss, right? It that number is much bigger than the several million you're spending on security right now. And so I think the investment's there. But I think on the other side of that coin is we've also seen security teams that are bloated and that are ineffective. They're not justifying their existence because they're not providing good information to anyone. They're not informing anyone of what the threat is. They're building their wall and they're staying behind the wall, and they only come out when the crisis happens, right? So I think there's fault on both sides here. And I would say that if you're your corporate security team has to be proactive in also educating people on the threats and being in the mix and letting people know what's going on and what to look out for and showing the value of that spend. Because if you don't show the value, right, it's going to go away, especially in a fiscally constrained time like we've seen in the last 2 years. That dollar's going to get reallocated. It just is what it is.
Right. Yeah, that's gonna be fun. So we talked about proactive. We're talking about rethinking about bringing convergence, cyber and physical. What's the third big takeaway you think we should focus on?
I mean, I think there's got to be some type of you know communication between security organizations in the Fortune 500. More so than we have now. I mean, I would say, like, okay, so if you consider if Brian Thompson was getting threats in that industry, it was likely other CEOs or other high profile individuals in other insurance companies were likely also going to be targeted, right? So was there any? We don't know. We don't know. But was that communication ever passed out to anyone else in the industry? Was there an industry wide bulletin, indicating, hey, there's a threat here? Because I think when we look at just greater economic protection for corporate America, right? If we know one CEO is being targeted in a specific industry, the other CEO should at least know that, hey, this individual is being targeted. You should probably look to augment your security as well, right? I think the amount of stock decline last week would have been mitigated to some degree if that word had gotten out and it was put out to the public that, yeah, these been threats made against some of these CEOs. We're increasing security, or, to rebolster confidence in the shareholders and in the market, right? Ultimately the market wants stability and it wants reassurances, right? And when you have an event like that happened last week, that shatters any type of stability or reassurance that you may have in a specific industry, right? So I think there has to be that crosstalk. I mean, I think a lot of this financial damage that happened last week could have been mitigated for a variety of reasons, but I think that crosstalk, we have to stop. We have to stop considering security to be my security, my company, me, I'm safe. But if you're not safe, it's not my problem. Because now this just shows actually it's everyone's problem. It's everyone's problem in that industry at this point. And the fallout from this is ongoing, right? And so I think that to me is the third takeaway here. There's got to be more communication when it comes to these type of threats.
And I think maybe, I mean, just communication of cyber threats between groups, but also being able to effectively communicate that risk to the C-suite across the board. And it's
Absolutely.
not talking about security, it's about talking risk. And you now have a quantifiable figure now. Like, unfortunately, I'm going to say it's an exhibit in this case, where if you don't do this, we now clearly know that when you lose your CEO and it makes the news cycle, you can lose $50 billion overnight.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, we have a number now, right? Which is not a pretty number, but I mean, it's a data point we can use now, right? To
Yep.
help sell the story. So, it's unfortunate, but I think those are the three, in my opinion, those are three big takeaways here. I mean, I think I hope that we just as security professionals, both cyber and physical, I hope we go back to the drawing board and do some, I think everyone should be doing right now this week a security program review and looking at what gaps you have, reaching out to partners in the industry to fill those gaps, and figure out how to keep everyone safe, right? And figure out how to keep things moving, for everyone. Because I mean, unfortunately, despite all the negative comments about the industry, I mean, United Healthcare, I think it's the fourth or fifth largest employer in the United States, right? So those employees are going to feel this just as bad as Mr. Thompson's family and the shareholders. Like the employee, like potentially they may have to look at layoffs now, right? It's a potential here with that kind of shareholder value loss. So I mean, everybody here is impacted, and only one person, thankfully, only one person was harmed here, but the impacts are massive for that company all the way across the board, right? So, I think we have to look at that from the security perspective of we're not only protecting the people, we're not only protecting the facilities, but we're protecting the financial stability of the company as well. And that directly ties to, how many people we can actually employ, how much we can actually invest in new products, new development. And that, I think that's an important metric that many people they overlook. They don't consider that, right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. We've talked a lot.
Yeah, we did.
We we've
Lots of thoughts.
we've hit a lot people a lot of information. All right. So final thoughts. I think we've hit this, and I think the big takeaway here is, you know, security and risk is just the cost of doing business, and it's something that, if we don't take seriously, it's gonna come back and roost. I think we can say that safely here.
Yeah, I would say that. I would, yeah, I mean, the you get what you pay for when it comes to security, and I mean, if you make zero investment in it, you shouldn't be shocked when you have events like what happened right last week.
Yeah.
Um, it's unfortunate, but it's true. It is a cost of doing business, but I think we see the impacts of low investment there, right?
Right. All right, Al. So sounds like we have the setup for another episode coming up.
Awesome.
So I'm Josh, and that's Al.